Hello and welcome to week 2 of our 5-week study in Esther. Today we're looking at the final part of chapter 2. So it's chapter 2 verses 19 to 23. We had a good kinship yesterday evening. A few of the folk who would normally join us were unable to be with us on Zoom, but there were 14 of us, which was really encouraging, and I think we had a good time. As part of our discussion, we were talking about God being in control, even when we don't see him or aren't aware of him, and what that might look like. I don't know what image it conjures up for you of God being in control of life, being in control of the world. But I was struck by the comparison with the role of a rugby referee. If you think about a rugby referee, he is in control of the match. Well, he should be in control of the match. But there are different ways of him exercising his control. One referee might enforce every jot and tittle of the law, blowing his whistle an awful lot, and the game never really getting into a flow and being broken up, but the referee being in control. But another referee might have a much more flexible approach. He's still in control, but there's less whistling going on. And the game flows better and is more enjoyable for everybody and is more fruitful. I don't know if that helps you, but I wonder if there is something there that helps us to explore, to understand the truth that God is in control. Anyway, back to Esther and back to the passage that we're studying. So we're on Esther chapter 2, verses 19 to verse 23. It's quite a short passage. And if you haven't read it yet, I suggest you sort of pause and have a read through those verses before we go on. So the story so far has shown us Queen Vashti being deposed and then Esther becoming queen in her place. And we now move on to Mordecai uncovering a conspiracy to assassinate the king. Now that Esther was in place as queen, God could use her to give Mordecai the opportunity to do something that would, at a later date, win great favour for Mordecai. And through all of that, be able to fulfil the purposes and plans of God. It's just a short story within the bigger story. It's a short story, but it very logically unpacks an example of how God works stage by stage. I think in reading those verses, there are a number of elements which we should probably think about. We should think about the fact that the story emphasizes that Esther's identity as a Jew was still being kept hidden, which is interesting. It's interesting that Esther was continuing to follow Mordecai's upbringing, that although she was now part of the royal household and it would have many influences on her life, she was still paying attention to what Mordecai, her adoptive father, had taught her. And then lastly, it's interesting that Mordecai and Esther are clearly still in communication, that although Esther is now in the royal court, she and Mordecai are still in touch. Mordecai's exact status is unclear. He clearly holds a fairly high position in the civil service. The words sitting at the king's gate would reflect this. The gate of an ancient city was its major commercial and legal centre. Markets were held in the gate. The court sat there to transact its business. It was a place where the more senior, in terms of age and responsibility, the more senior citizens would meet and debate and gossip and talk about life. And the fact that Mordecai was sitting in the gate indicates that he had some status in society. The story of the actual conspiracy, its discovery, and the resulting punishment of Bigthana and Teresh is told in such a concise, short way that it's clear that it's the roles played by Esther and Mordecai that we should be paying attention to. The conspiracy and the deaths are less important. Well, they were obviously pretty important to Bigthana and Teresh, but less important to us. So this short story is part of the bigger story plot of the Lord getting Mordecai and Esther into the right place for him to use them for his plans and his purposes. And we might, in our conversation, explore those three areas I've mentioned: Esther keeping her identity, Esther continuing to follow Mordecai's upbringing, Esther and Mordecai still being in communication. But perhaps we could also talk this week about the place between coincidences and what some people call God incidences. Did God arrange for Mordecai to overhear the conspiracy? Or was it just a coincidence that he was there at that time in the gate? I imagine, because we're taking part in this study and because this story is in the Bible, that most of us would tend to feel that God was involved. But how does this apply to our lives, our everyday lives? See, when Mordecai got up that morning and went off to the gate, to him it was just another day. So how does it all work in our lives? There are many questions. The questions of the balance between God incidences and coincidences. What's the difference between God making things happen and God allowing things to happen? I wonder if sometimes there's a danger of me, and perhaps of you, downplaying God's part, downplaying God's role, because I want to avoid people thinking I'm too spiritual, too heavenly minded to be any earthly use at all. And where does serendipity come into it all? So perhaps some of us could share stories, good examples, maybe the struggle that we have in working out that balance of God in control and coincidences. How does it all blend together? How does it all fit? So I look forward to your responses. And as we said before, we have another 10 passages, and we're looking for others to write some study notes. If you would like to volunteer, that would be really good. But have a great week, and I look forward to being in touch with you soon. Have a good blessing.